My name is Catherine, and today I will be going over the AP 3D Art and Design portfolio that earned me a score of 5. In 2025, only 7% of test takers received a score of 5, and today I will be going over the written evidence portion of my submission, my sustained investigation images, my selected works, and various tips I think would help a student maximize their score on this exam. I will first be going through the general format of the exam, so if you are already familiar with that, you can skip directly to this timestamp so you can see the works in my portfolio. So, as some of you may or may not know, the AP 3D Art and Design exam is divided into 3 general components. So the first section is the sustained investigation section, in which you will submit 15 images that represent a body of works that seeks to answer an inquiry that the student comes up with. The images could be process work and documentation, or they could also be completed, fully resolved works. Optimally, it should be a balance of both to really show the artistic thinking process and how you're really thinking about your inquiry and letting it transform, evolve, and represent itself in a visual form. Also in the sustained investigation section is the written evidence portion, in which students are given the opportunity to verbally explain their investigation, their inquiry, and how it has developed through practice, experimentation, and revision. The final portion is the selected work section, in which students will pick 5 projects that best exemplify their use of visual techniques or conceptual representation. And for AP 3D art specifically, you'll submit 10 images, 2 pictures, 2 pieces of documentation per project. In both the sustained investigation section and the selected work section, students are able to give essential information about their artwork, including size, media, references or inspiration, etc. And it's also important to keep in mind that there are different graders for each section that don't see the other section, so the people grading the selected work session will not be seeing all the images included in the sustained investigation that may give a selected project more context. So that's something important to keep in mind. And yeah, with all that said, let's go into my 3D art and design portfolio. So first, I will be going over what I wrote for the written evidence section. The first prompt is, identify the inquiry that guided your sustained investigation. Ever since childhood, my synesthesia, a neurological process that blends sensory experiences, has defined how I view the world. Words and movement translated to color, while touch and sound embodied themselves in shapes. Exploring and explaining my sixth sense often felt confusing and frustrating. Thus, I asked myself, how can I express the ideas my synesthesia offers through manifestations and installations? Sculpture solidifies the intuitive imagery my brain involuntarily conjures by examining overlaps and areas of nuance between seemingly unrelated ways our brains guide us through the world. The second prompt is, describe ways your sustained investigation developed through practice, experimentation, and revision. My response to that question is, my first project analyzed primary colors solely to represent their technical use as fundamental colors. However, I moved to representing my first-hand experiences, such as feeling abnormal, touching everyday objects, hearing chords on the piano, and playing with cats. I depicted the synesthete's body and its visions. My investigation culminates in allowing others to also experience synesthesia through a public installation. I experimented with differing media and spatial languages/geometries while finding ways to render each view of a work unique to represent the dynamism of human sensibility. Okay, so image 1 of my sustained investigation is not the best show of my technical skill, but I decided to make it my first image to provide a good foundation for what my entire portfolio seeked to explore, which was my synesthesia. You don't have to give titles to you can't give titles to your slides. So in my mind, I called this the sensing face, and it's a really tiny project. It was actually, I think, the last project I completed because I felt like I needed something that could really introduce my topic in an effective way. And so it is obviously a face, a deconstructed face, you know, eyes, nose, mouth, and it's connected to what is supposed to abstractly represent a brain, with multicolored like string that is like going out of all the different features. The brain is composed of what looks like, you know, a drawing of a human face and like all the different sensory experiences it could have. You know, all the, if you look here, all the letters and numbers translated into colors, and also just various pieces of like very vibrant, bright colors. And this was just supposed, and I have my process work down here, and I just wrote, what is synesthesia? Because this first work is supposed to kind of introduce the grader to my inquiry. And so it's supposed to represent how my brain interprets how my senses, my features translate to senses, which go directly to my brain and cause my synesthesia to have to do its thing essentially, and kind of blend the senses and give me a unique way to view the world. So images 2 and 3 are representations of the same project. Image 2 is the process work that led up to the finished work in image 3. And so my process work really kind of just shows my thinking process. So I was trying to represent the fundamental role of primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, as they are the colors that make all the other colors. So they are essentially the backbone of the color wheel. And I thought there's a sturdy cubic representation would best conceptualize their fundamental role in art and color theory. So I think it's really, like, process work isn't supposed to be perfect. I am always very messy with my process work. I jot down notes to really let the viewer know what was going through my brain, how I was making connections that translated into visual representations. So going to image 3, obviously I kind of stuck with my vision of having a sturdy cubic structure, and as you can see at the top of the structure, it's very color heavy, and then it kind of inverts into kind of wooden outlines. It's as if we literally just took the outlines of the top half and just took out the color. So I think this assembled dichotomy of hue and structure is meant to represent, so these are the literal colors, and the wooden structure is symbolic of how strong they are. And to further kind of like drive my point home, I also included some images of me holding up the structure from 2 different angles. So the first in the top image, I am holding it from the top half with a single strand of wire, and it's being held aloft only by the top half, which is the literal colors, and it's perfectly sturdy. It's floating there, it's chilling, and on the bottom half it is also still remaining intact, even if the wire is solely relying on the wooden half of the structure. So I thought that conceptually best represented the importance and fundamental role of primary colors. So how this relates to my synesthesia is that I translated one way to view the world, color, into a structural concept. So it's a translation from color to structure, or even concept to structure, because it's the concept of fundamentality and the primary colors themselves translated into a structure. Images 4 and 5 also represent their own project. So With this project, I wanted to get somewhat more personal with my personal experience living with synesthesia because I didn't want it to just be this mechanical way of, conceptualizing the world. It's something I actually that I experience on a daily basis when processing the world around me. So this project is meant to represent grapheme color synesthesia, which is when someone associates like letters and numbers with colors or other visual elements. So that is this form of synesthesia, which to me personally is the strongest. Like when I was a child and I would read books, like it was like colors were basically like flying off the page. And even if I think my synesthesia is generally a blessing, it allows me to kind of have a sixth sense to view the world. It can also be very difficult. It was very difficult for me as a child to, explain that I saw the world this way to like my parents, my teachers, and my classmates. So in essence, the figure represents an individual with synesthesia, or me, who is expected to conform to societal norms of how you're conventionally supposed to see the world, which is represented by the impalement using of like black sticks, because black is the antithesis of color and kind of just like the absence of the sixth sense. And clearly the figure is still bleeding. I used colored yarn to kind of represent how the figure is still seeing color, like synesthesia still runs in their blood, and they, even if they're expected to conform, they can't just unsynesthese themselves, and their true self will nevertheless still shine through even if society expects them to behave or see the world a certain way. If you zoom in, you can also see that I scrawled like a bunch of words in Sharpie on the mound that the figure is standing on to represent how this is a piece about grapheme color synesthesia, how, all these black words that are just supposed to be words and nothing else can also have this second dimension of having an abstract visual element to them. Images 6 and 7 are also two parts of the same project. So I call this project the topography of touch because I sought to analyze how touch could not only translate, the intensity of touch could not only translate into color, but also into shape, which is the topography. And I took inspiration from like thermal gradient maps or like thermal topographies. I'm not really sure what they're called, but like this is what they look like. And so essentially I literally just took my hand and I put 4 objects on a dollar bill, a Summer Fridays lip gloss, a ring, and a sewing needle, and kind of put them in my hand and kind of thought, okay, how can I represent this intensity in 2 dimensions, topography and color? So with this project, it's gigantic. It was a real pain to just cut all these individual pieces and put them together, but in the end, I think it was worth it. I really made a lot of use of Lightroom and Photoshop, smoothed it out up to the saturation, kind of got rid of the rough edges, smoothed it out so it looked more like a real temperature gradient. And I also made sure to get multiple angles to really show that it was a dynamic piece, it was a cohesive piece. And yeah, it kind of reminds me of those, like weather maps or, those thermal analyses, whatever you call them. And I really try to drive home that aesthetic by, using a black background. So it's every little decision counts. So just really, you have an idea, just go all in. So images 8, 9, and 10 are all components of the same project. This was called Constructing Cadences or Constructing Chords. So I am an advanced pianist and I've been playing for over 10 years. And for those of you who did not take and suffer through AP Music Theory like I did, chords are very essential to composition, and they're all prescribed in a way that they have a really specific sound. And generally the four most like common chords are the one chord, the fourth chord, the five chord, and the six chord. So I decided to kind of just listen to each of those multiple times and be like, how can I translate this sound into a visual representation? And these were my four sketches in which I kind of planned out how I wanted to structure them, and also like what elements of the sound of each of these chords like justified this visual representation. Like the first chord is like considered a very stable chord. It's very regular. So I associated that with like a more cubic or like grid-like visual representation, because it's supposed to be complete or perfect or expected. The fourth chord is supposed to be like a bright and exciting chord, and I try to translate that into some really exciting shapes because of all the intersecting planes and like the polygonal geometry. The fifth chord is it's also kind of similar to the one chord. It's stabilizing, it's perfect, so it also has that very regular spatial language. And the sixth chord is supposed to be, it's if a song ends in a sixth chord, it's supposed to kind of sound unfinished, and so that's why I thought of it more of as a confusing or a dissonant chord, so it has a very kind of wonky, abstract, organic structure. And here are the representations of the four chords I decided to bring to life from multiple angles, kind of just showing my documentation skills. And finally, I combined these chords in 5 of the most common cadences, which in music theory is the ending to a song prescribed by how the chord progression and how the chord progression sounds. So we have authentic, half, and another version of half, so I guess it's only 4 cadences, plagal, and deceptive. So I literally just constructed these because they're constructions of chord progressions, and I just put the visual representations of the chords together, strung them together like a jigsaw, and that's what they sound like, and that's what they look like. Yay, synesthesia. Images 11 and 12 represent my project, Chromatic Kinetics, which kind of analyzes the movement of cats and how that translates into color, and also just the intersection of different planes represented by string, because I kind of analyze like the body lines of the cats and how they move, and how, you know, the frenzy with which they move and their energy is translated into these spontaneous bursts of color. Not gonna lie, this is not my favorite project. It looks a little messy. It's not as conceptually elegant as I'd say my other projects were, but again, the sustained investigation is really just kind of show how your thought process evolves like through your artwork. And even though this was not my favorite artwork, I still think it still translated one sense, the sense of movement, to another visual and, you know, structure. So yeah. Finally, images 13, 14, and 50 are the grand finale, the culmination of my art portfolio. So this entire time I've been trying to share with the world how my synesthesia affects how I view the world, and now I have just conceptualized a project that is in theory supposed to allow people to actually kind of experience synesthesia firsthand, and it is the synesthesia tunnels, in which the colors of the rainbow are translated into different segments of structure in one long public installation that people can interact with. So essentially each color is translated into one spatial language. Red was translated to layer, orange, splice, yellow, spiral, green, encase, blue, intersect, and violet, wrap. And here are like all the sketches I made for how I kind of wanted to make kind of the vibes and the general aesthetic and general spatial language each section was supposed to have, and why it has that. You see, like I have like the color associations. Again, my notes are a big part of my thinking process, and I always want to put them in my process work. And here this is the overall shot and some isometric views of each of the sections. So as you can see, it is actually just literally cardboard, and I shot it in my living room, and I spent like half a day photoshopping this to like kind of overlay the color so it looks kind of more clean, curated, more elegant. My art teacher asked if this was actually like a digital rendering. I'm like, nope, just a lot of Photoshop. And here are some, chunk views, like chunks of each section, really showcasing the spatial language and also the little silhouettes cropped in to kind of show how people can interact with the exhibit, how they can sit, how they can walk, how they can, have conversations, what places are open, what places are open spaces that people can interact with one another and really just have breathing room, and what places are supposed to be kind of like safer little nooks and sanctuaries, and what places are just, something interesting to look at and just experience firsthand. And yeah, that concludes me going over my sustained investigation section. So let's move to selected works. So for my selected works, I wanted to not only choose the 5 pieces I think best represented my technical skill, my 3D art skill, but also I wanted to kind of give them a comprehensive overview of synesthesia, because the graders for this section did not read my my written evidence portion, so I still want to communicate the idea of, blending senses, blending sensory experiences, blending different ways of seeing the world through 5 pieces. So that's why my first selected work is the synesthesia tunnels, because I wanted this to be the first one they saw, because in my opinion it is the best work, and I think it best encapsulates why I created this portfolio, to bring synesthesia to other people, and B, it's just a very clean translation of the senses. It's color to spatial language, color to shape. And my second selected work, I decided to go with the topography of touch, because this is a different translation. This is from touch to color and shape. And I also think I was really able to let my digital editing skills really shine through with this one. And this also feels, also more like a strong translation, because even I referenced that I was inspired by typographic thermogradients in the ideas section. And those kinds of maps are really also kind of just synesthesia in practice, because you are synthesizing different ways of analyzing topography or an area to give people a comprehensive view of an area, of like the nature of an area and what's kind of going on over there. And work 3, I decided to go with my primary color sculpture, because I also felt like this had strong documentation, and there's also a strong connection between like the concept and how it's visually represented, and how concept is able to translate into color, and well, vice versa. And work number 4 was again a unique translation from sound to shape, and again also demonstrates strong visual technique. And finally, I wanted work number 5 to be my representation of a grapheme color synesthete, because I think ending it on a more personalized note, a more humanized note, really just drives home that this isn't just a series of analyses of how different senses can interact. It is something very personal to me, and something a part of myself that I want to show the world. And so with both my sustained investigation and selected works gone over, I just wanted to end this video by giving future test takers some tips for the test that I think are tried and true. My first tip is to get everything done early. not only are you just feeling much less overwhelmed by studying for all your other APs, like I took 6 other AP exams when I also had to submit my 3D art and design portfolio. So I made sure my portfolio, all my works, all my documentation were pretty much done like 3 weeks before the deadline. And I think this is important not only for, like the 3D art portfolio, but just also just schoolwork and life in general, because, if you have everything done early, if you notice something last minute that if you notice something later down the line, when you're in the process of editing and submitting things, you have time to change it. You have time to make it better. If you procrastinate and leave everything the last minute, you kind of you eliminate the possibility of effective revision, which I think is a big part of the artistic process. And I also think, and also College Board has in the past had issues, especially if everyone's logging on at the same time and everyone's trying to submit. There have been technical issues. You don't want to have to be emailing College Board like a minute before the deadline and saying, hey, I had technical issues, I couldn't submit it, because that's a huge hassle and no one wants to deal with that. And I think it's really important, in order to achieve this goal of getting everything done early, it's important to have independence and be able to, time manage, schedule yourself. Hey, I should have this many projects done by this deadline. I should finish the I should finish the project itself by this time and the documentation by this time. And just being able to set your own pace, but also make sure to stay on schedule is, I think, a really important skill for this exam, because it's even if it's not an exam you're sitting down to take, it's still an overwhelming and heavy lifting exam. My second tip is that documentation is key. As you guys have seen throughout my portfolio, I always include multiple angles. I always make sure everything is perfect. I always make sure that my documentation is perfectly clear. I always make sure that my process work really kind of lends into and adds to the finished works, and there's like a cohesive narrative being weaved. And because that is the way a grader can really see the progression of your thought. So really make use of platforms like Photoshop and Lightroom, because they will really be your saving graces. And I think good documentation always just makes your work look more professional and your artistic choices more intentional. You want your documentation to really do your work justice, because the graders are not seeing your work in real life. They're seeing how you're curating it. My third tip is that you have to really convey your ideas well. Communication is just as important as visual representation. You have to be concise, but at the same time also make sure you're packing all the meat and potatoes of your ideas in those really, really tight word and character limits for the descriptions and also for the written evidence portion. You want to make use of abbreviations. As I said before, do not be afraid to use abbreviations, and really just, if you think explaining a concept won't really like help the grader like really understand your work better, at a certain point you have to know what to cut out. Maybe you have a really long backstory behind an artwork. We love that. Maybe one day a museum will let you type out a really long descriptor for it, but in this case, give what you think is the most essential information. And this just goes for all areas of life. And finally, my fourth tip is, cringy as it sounds, be bold and really stand out. I did synesthesia, a concept super personal to me. I experimented with a lot of different media because I wanted to kind of set myself apart as somebody who experiments and somebody who is willing to go the extra mile to kind of discover new ways to convey my ideas. And I think always just having more personal ideas, just it makes the works much more impactful and powerful, and really shows your prowess as a storyteller, which I think is very, very important skill to have in being a visual artist. And yeah, thank you for sticking to the end. This has been Catherine's AP 3D art portfolio. I hope you enjoyed. I'm hoping to do more videos like this in the future, kind of going over my art and just giving tips and yeah, just putting my work and my thoughts out there. So thank you so much for watching this video, and bye!